Borough Council licensing meeting. I'm Councillor Ashraf, Chair of the committee. There are no scheduled fire drills tonight, so in the event of fire alarm, please leave the building via the spider staircase and the main reception door. Once outside, turn left and go to the fire assembly point on Exchange Road. If you are unable to use the stairs, you will be guided by a member of staff to the evacuation lift. This meeting is being live streamed via the Council's YouTube channel. Please note that there is no comment function available. The Council is the data controller and will retain the data collected during this webcast. This will be done in accordance with the Council's published data retention policy. Anyone seated in the public gallery should be aware that by entering the room, you are consenting to your image being captured by the automated camera system. Recordings will be used for webcasting or training purposes. The meeting agenda is available on the Council's website. Around these tables sit the committee members who will be taking decisions on the items before them, as well as Council officers. Apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies? No. So item 2 is disclosure of interest. If any committee members has any interest to declare, please indicate now. Councillor Nawaz.
Thank you, Chair. As this is talking about payment licenses, I have an interest in one of the business in Crawley town centre area, which is I've got interest in that. So that's why I have to declare that. That's my interest.
If you have been lobbied on matters relating to the main agenda item, please indicate now. No. Item 3, minutes. The last meeting was held on 18th June 24. Does the committee agree that the minutes are an accurate record of the meeting? Agree. Thank you. Item 4, licensing subcommittee minutes. We have 2 sets of licensing subcommittee minutes to approve this evening. The first was in relation to the premises license at Mount Emmy, which was held on 12th February 24. Do the members of the subcommittee, namely Councillor Eileen Balban and Irvine, agree that the minutes are an accurate record of the meeting? Item 5, licensing subcommittee minutes again. A licensing subcommittee meeting for the premises license at Best One was held on 24th April 24. Do the members of that subcommittee, myself and Councillors Irvine and Jaggard, agree that the minutes are an accurate record of that meeting? Thank you. Item 6, public question time. We'll now move on to the public question time. The Constitution states that questions need to relate to an item on the agenda. So at this meeting, we will only be taking questions about the payment licensing policy. Are there any questions on this item? Do we have any written questions through email or anything? No. All right. Thank you. Item 7, payment licensing policy. We will now move on to the report HCS/081. Please will the team leader for health and safety and licensing present the report. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, members of the committee. This evening you're here to consider the pavement licensing policy, including fees and enforcement under the provisions of the Business and Planning Act 2020 as amended by the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023. Section 1 of the report gives you the purpose, which is a summary of the historical position. The Council's been responsible for pavement licensing since 2020 on a temporary basis for processing and determination of all applications in relation to pavement licensing under the Business and Planning Act 2020. This process has recently become a permanent regime and a licensing function of the Council, and the application process for a pavement licence is enshrined and broadly prescribed in legislation. However, there are elements within the process which the Council must determine locally, and this includes the policy and the setting of application fees, the period of time a licence will have effect, and conditions appended to the licences which must be complied with. Section 2 of the report provides you with a recommendation insofar as that the Licensing Committee is recommended to adopt the suggested fee structure as included at Appendix B with immediate effect, and for any subsequent revisions to be fees to be delegated to the Head of Community Services in conjunction with the portfolio holder and share of licensing. And Part B is to agree where it is appropriate to grant a pavement licence that is ordinarily granted for a period of 2 years. And Part C, that you amend the pavement licence policy as is included at Appendix A. Section 3 of the report provides the reasons for the recommendation, and as I've stated, the licensing service has historically avoided drawing on general funds for the administration of the licensing regime and endeavoured to recover costs via fees as much as possible. The current fee structure previously determined by central government does not fully meet the costs associated with the delivery of the current service of the pavement licensing regime. Section 4 covers the background and the issues to be resolved. And 4.1, in order to place objects or structures on the highway, these are listed in section 115A brackets 1 of the Highways Act historically, and applications had to be submitted to West Sussex County Council under the Highways Act 1980. The fees charged for this process varied between local authorities, and there was a 28-day calendar consultation period. The most recent charges seen on their website for a tables and chairs licence under the regime administered by West Sussex County Council was £520 for 1 year, according to their historical records. As a direct response to the COVID-19 pandemic, a range of measures to help businesses recover, including new ways of working arising as a result of the disruption caused by the pandemic, were introduced by the Business and Planning Act 2020, which received royal assent in July 2020, and moved the responsibility of administering and regulating pavement licensing to local authorities. So in common with other authorities, this authority now assumes that responsibility. The various measures contained within the 2020 Act supported the transition from immediate crisis response and lockdown measures arising from the pandemic towards economic recovery. The measures implemented included the use of outdoor areas for businesses' operations, allowed businesses to operate in safer ways of working to manage the then ongoing risks from COVID-19, in particular social distancing. Part 1 of the 2020 Act introduced a new but temporary fast-track application process for a pavement licence and for the administration to move to district councils. Compared to West Sussex County Council, under Crawley Borough Council, pavement licence application under the 2020 Act is cheaper, easier and a quicker way for businesses such as cafes, restaurants and bars to secure a licence to replace removable furniture, for example, counters or stools or seats and tables from the outside area to which it relates. The regime is designed to be quicker and easier for businesses to comply with, and allows them to extend their operations to outside areas as detailed in 4.4. Furniture must be removable, and benches and umbrellas and barriers on the highway will need to be within a specific curtilage relating to the service, sale and consumption of food or drink. In principle, this actually means it's not a permanent fixed structure and is able to be moved easily and stored elsewhere after the end of any licence that's been issued. Advertising boards are not included in this new regime and still fall within the remit of the Highways Act 1980 and are covered under the Town and Country Planning Control of Advertisement Regulations 2007. That remit remains with West Sussex County Council. Applicants that wish to place non-removable furniture onto the highway also must apply for permissions under the Highways Act. This new legislation is specifically for furniture that can be removed and is present on the highway on a temporary basis. In all cases, applications for a pavement licence are made for a prescribed purpose. This includes the use of furniture by the licence holder to sell or serve food or drink supplied from or in connection with a relevant use of the premises. A relevant use means somewhere such as a public house, a bar or other drinking establishment, and it can also include a cafe, for example. When originally enacted under the 2020 Act, it was initially only possible to grant a pavement licence up until September 2021. However, due to the continuation of the pandemic, central government extended the regime and legislation, albeit initially on a temporary basis, until March 2024. As a result of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023 coming into effect on the 31st of March this year, responsibility for pavement licensing became a permanent licensing function of districts and boroughs, and that's currently carried out by the licensing team. A business which uses the premises for the sale of food or drink or for the consumption on or off the premises can apply for a licence. Businesses that are eligible, as I've stated, include public houses, cafes, bars, restaurants, snack bars, coffee shops and ice cream parlours. Those are examples also provided by central government, including where such a form is ancillary to an activity of another type. For example, it's important to note that supermarkets are not eligible, or entertainment venues where there's a food area and drink area. A licence permits the business to use furniture placed on the highway to sell or serve food and or to allow it to be used for people to consume there. Businesses that do not use premises for the sale or supply of drink, for example, hair salons, would not be eligible. Although they can apply to place permanent furniture on the pavement under the Highways Act as previously detailed, they would not be eligible under the pavement licensing regime under the legislation previously stated. Furniture that's not removable and used in connection with the outdoor selling or consumption of food are not permitted by a pavement licence. As I've stated previously, advertising boards are not included in the definition of furniture within the pavement licensing regime. They would need consent from the Highways Act and other regulations as stated in 4.13. Applicants that wish to place non-removable furniture on the highway must apply through the regulations as specified at 4.13, and we would generally expect that footways, restrictions to pedestrians and roads and the places to which vehicles have access are restricted or prohibited. Highways must be maintained by National Rail or other area Crown land are also exempt from the regime, so a licence can't be granted in those instances as detailed in 4.13. It doesn't grant the right to permanently close a road, and there are different regulations detailed in 4.14 where that provision would apply. And the 2020 and 23 Act prescribe the overall statutory framework and the process that must be followed when applying or processing an application or indeed enforcing it. And 4.15 gives you a summary of the steps required. And I'll just to highlight the headlines, Chair, if that's okay through you, rather than reading things verbatim. The application, it must be made in writing in a prescribed format, and 4.15 gives an overview of what the application comprises. We also require that there's supporting documentation submitted, which includes public liability insurances, plans, types of furniture intended, and so on. The maximum fee that originally could be charged was £100 for a 1-year licence. This was set by central government. It's important to note that since the 31st of March 2024, it has been permissible to charge up to £350 for a renewal application and £500 for a new application in respect of a pavement licence for a maximum duration of 2 years. Proposed new fees are placed before the committee for consideration this evening. The regime also requires a publishing and advertising requirement on the premises so that persons nearby and those interested parties are aware of the application and to inform them of such. And there is a consultation process. The new consultation period is now 14 days. It's a statutory requirement that the council specifically consults with the Highways Authority and such other persons as it considers appropriate. The council in this area not only consults the Highways or West Sussex County Council, but also elected members, other CBC departments, for example, Development Control, Economic Development and Environmental Services, as well as Sussex Police and the Business and Fire Safety team at West Sussex Fire and Rescue Service. The matters are also detailed on our public register. The determination period is changed from 7 days previously to 14 days, and it's now the case that pavement licences can be granted for a maximum period, as I've stated, for 2 years, whereas previously it was for 1 year only. Once information is submitted to the Council, the authority has 28 days from the day after the application being made to determine the matter. This consists of the 14-day consultation period that I've detailed previously, and then a 14-day determination period. Prior to this, the consultation period was 7 days, and the determination was 7 days, comprising of 14 days. This 28-day period has been set by the new legislation. Licences are not transferable between parties, and if a new occupier of a premises takes control, a new licence application is required. Fees are also not refundable. As I've stated previously, the fee for 1 year currently is £100. There are a series of conditions which are appended to the policy before you for consideration today that the authority would consider attaching to the licence. There are some mandatory conditions relating to a smoking area and so on, and those are included as part of the policy document. Further information can be found, as I said, at Appendix A, and there are some additional provisions about access and egress, controls of the types of structures that would be permitted in a pavement licensed area, and considerations that a business operator would need to make in terms of noise management, supervision and control. And the authority can consider any other suitable conditions it considers appropriate to manage and oversee the operation of those pavement licences. Section 5 gives you the current policy and regulation. I don't propose to go through that verbatim. I've given you a comprehensive overview. In terms of the conditions that are currently being proposed for you this evening, we have worked quite hard to ensure that they are balanced, proportionate, and have achieved the difficult position of allowing businesses to trade and benefit from the use of the public highway, whilst also ensuring that it doesn't have a detrimental effect on nearby residents, businesses, or those who visit Crawley, particularly those who are vulnerable, who may have a disability where additional access and egress is required. Where a pavement licence is granted, clear access routes in the highway will need to be maintained, as I said, taking into account the needs of all users, including disabled people. There are some proposed revisions to the policy from what is currently in place in terms of the form and content that's proposed before your consideration this evening. And in summary, they are additional information regarding the provision of outside smoking areas to comply with the mandatory requirements, and also the prohibition of smoking in a substantially enclosed space covered by different regulatory regimes, but nonetheless relevant. Reinforcement of the mandatory conditions, and additional conditions and revisions to conditions regarding the placement of articles on the highway, including matters concerning public safety that we have learnt as regulatory officers, as the body that's been regulating this regime for some time. Other than those already in place by virtue of the 2020 Act, but removed at the end of each trading day, each marquee and gazebos or similar structures will not be permitted on the highway, other than those existing premises that will be looking to renew their licences. A summary of the proposed revisions to the current policy, if approved, has been included for your consideration in the appendices. Since March 31st, 2024, as I've said, we've been given responsibility for taking on the enforcement in relation to furniture on the highway where it's not authorised. And Section 5.5 gives you the provisions of regulation and when councils can take action. And the council may require the furniture to be removed and stored, require the person to pay the authority's reasonable costs in removing and storing the furniture, or return the furniture to those reasonable costs are paid. It also allows the authority to retain any proceeds of sale of purposes it sees fit. The legislation also allows the authority powers to cancel and amend licences in specific circumstances. It is important to note that the regime is designed to facilitate businesses and support businesses with appropriate checks and balances in place to make sure those areas that have been defined are not unwittingly extended or cause a noise, nuisance, disturbance or other challenge to those in the vicinity. Section 6 gives you an overview of the licence duration and fees. Much of, as I said, the regime must be followed and is prescribed in legislation. There are elements which must be determined locally. These include fee setting for both renewal and new application, as well as determining a period of the pavement licence regime and the duration it can be granted. As I've said, the maximum duration under the 2003 Act is 2 years. Previously, under the old regime, if I may call it that, the maximum duration was 1 year and a fee previously set by central government of £100. The fee itself is non-refundable and it cannot be transferred. It is proposed that this remains the case if any new fees determined by the authority. The current fee of £100 does not currently reflect the cost of providing the service, and new burdens funding was provided to local authorities in previous years to offset that cost. But it's in setting any new maximum fee levels, there's recognition by central government of the permanence of the new regime, and that fees need to be increased to cover the costs and the ongoing costs of administering the licensing regime relating to pavement licensing. Revisions under the 2003 Act, as I've previously stated, allow the authority to charge up to £500 for a new pavement licence or £350 for a renewal. And authorities may choose to grant the licence for 1 or 2 years, but maximum duration is 2 years. Currently, we have 21 pavement licences in effect across the borough, and they're due to expire at the end of September 2024. Of these, the majority are either held directly by owners or franchisees of well-known high street businesses and others by smaller independent traders. The vast majority of payment licences have been issued in respect of alcohol licensed premises, and I thought I'd note that for the interest of the committee. Premises fees issued in connection with the sale and supply of alcohol under the Licensing Act 2003, albeit a separate regime, have remained the same since 2006. Despite local authorities lobbying for these items to be increased to reflect the cost of administration. The pavement licensing regime is separate to this. As I've said previously, the vast majority of premises that have applied are the alcohol premises, for want of a better expression, who are already operating a premises in connection with permissions under the Licensing Act 2003 to sell alcohol. There is some misunderstanding within the community is that people believe that different forms of street furniture may be placed on the highway without licences being in place, and we are currently carrying out extensive work to educate traders and the wider public and encourage applications for licences to secure compliance where they're not currently in place. West Sussex County Council will not issue any further tables and chairs licences and have been signposting those parties interested in a pavement licence to us as the new issuing authority, Crawley Borough Council. And indeed, where West Sussex County Council receive a complaint about articles on the highway excluding A boards, they are forwarding those to the authority. The licensing team are currently investigating and continue to investigate complaints in relation to businesses that are not currently compliant, with the emphasis on education and encouragement to try and secure compliance rather than anything more robust at this stage. The application fees will need to cover a range of functions. This includes advising on applications of all types, initial scrutiny of all the applications by officers, which is quite labour intensive, the processing of applications, updating of systems and liaising with applicants in case of omissions and errors, consultation with and associated feedback, including where representations have been made, visiting sites on a number of occasions to check compliance with legislation, advertising and notice display, proposed site and furniture suitability, and regulatory and enforcement checks to ensure compliance with the legislation, council policy and licence conditions. Given the length of the amount of work required, the consideration and determination of applications, it's proposed that the fees are set at the permitted maximum of £350 for a renewal application and £500 for a new application. However, it's recommended that licences are granted for a maximum period of 2 years to ease the administrative burden on both businesses and operators and the council as the licensing authority. A breakdown of the costs associated with the service are included at Appendix B, and the fees being charged with other neighbouring authorities is included at Appendix C. It's worthy of note that several other authorities are still going through the committee process to determine their final fee structure, so the amounts indicated are where they have been available to me. This approach ensures that not insofar as it's reasonably practicable, income is generated to cover the costs of providing the service, but it also gives operators commercial certainty in terms of knowing that they have a licence for a significant period of time. The licensing service has historically avoided drawing on general funds for the administration of the licensing regime and endeavoured to recover costs via fees as much as possible. The current fee structure, as I said previously determined by central government, does not currently meet the costs associated with the delivery of the service, but these have initially been offset by the new burdens funding, as I've previously mentioned. Income and expenditure can be reviewed in coming years and an adjustment made if necessary. It's important to note that historical records indicate that West Sussex County Council, who were previously responsible for administering and regulating the regime, albeit under different legislation, were charging £520 for 1 year licences. That was in 2022. By comparison, if the fee for renewal is agreed by members at £350, this equates to £175 per annum for a 2 year licence and £250 per annum for a new licence, if granted, if the fee is set at £500. Section 7 gives you the overview of the issues to be resolved. And as I've stated, it's important that the service seeks to cover its costs and not draw on general funds. And it's important to ensure that the various fees associated with the administration, enforcement and regulation of the pavement licensing regime are set at the appropriate level, this being at the reasonable costs of providing the service and ensuring that they are properly recovered. As I've stated, a 2 year licence is recommended with the permitted maximum of £350 and £500 respectively for a renewal and a new licence application. And Section 7.5 sets those out. Section 8 gives you an overview of the staffing equalities and financial and legal implications. I don't propose to go through that verbatim, but there will be an additional responsibility within the service to administer and regulate and enforce the new regime as is put before you today, and it's difficult to exactly estimate the number and volume of workload that is likely to arise. As I said, currently we have 21 pavement licences in force. We are doing an education campaign to encourage individuals where appropriate or businesses to comply and apply for licences to regularise positions. And the policy in place sets the framework for the decision-making process, sets out conditions and sets the approach that the authority will take in determining matters, and this will help safeguard the authority in the event of a legal challenge. 8.6 gives you the obligations under the Crime and Disorder Act, and the Equality Act at 8.7, and an equality impact assessment is included in the appendices also, as one would expect to see with a policy of this nature. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The committee will now consider the matter. Committee members wishing to speak should raise their hand, and officers will respond to queries one by one. Please remember to refer to paragraph numbers when commenting on specific parts of the report. Do you have any questions, please? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Less questions, more sort of personal observations as a member of the committee. Now, I'm happy with the process as it's been set out in the policy, and also the principle of the 2 yearly licence renewal. That's all fine as far as I'm concerned. I think where I do have some concerns, I think it might need some changes, is just the section 3.2 relating to the fees that are charged. Now, there's a bit of a history to this because some time back when West Sussex County Council dealt with this, there was a large flat rate annually that was being charged. There was a big petition about it. Particularly, it was felt quite keenly over the COVID period in particular, but it was a big deal because many businesses, smaller ones that want pavement licences, sort of not cafes, you know, they just want a few tables and chairs outside their building because they want to show they're open for business. And one of the concerns that I've had is that the problem is if the cost is too high, it puts off smaller businesses, particularly those outside of the town centres, if it's too high. Now, at the moment, what we've got is a proposal which is one size fits all. And my feeling is that the current figures that are proposed are that they're even if it's over 2 years, they're a bit on the high side for smaller businesses. And I just worry that might put things off. Now, I am drawn to the appendix, and I can see that there are examples, Brighton and Hove and Chichester, for example, where what you paid to cover the fee for the licence reflects the size of the business or the rateable value. What I'd like to propose is that we agree the policy, but subject to delegating the final decision on fees that are outlined in the policy, the fees that are charged, to the Cabinet Member for Public Protection in consultation with the head of service to decide this section, taking into account the concerns expressed for the need for charging based on the size of the business and the benefit that is derived from the licence. Because what I don't want to do with this particular policy is actually put off some smaller businesses who might like to exercise the benefits of having a pavement licence. Hopefully members of the committee follow my reasoning here. But clearly, I would say the benefit you get from a pavement licence is far higher if you're a high street business than it is if you're a small cafe based somewhere else. So I think there could be some benefit if the officers could go away and look at this and actually come up with something which was equitable under all the circumstances. And I think it would be fair for the Cabinet Member to then sort of look at that and decide something which would be fair, bearing all that in mind. Much fairer, I think, than just a flat rate, which I think will just... my concern is it will just put off some businesses. They won't bother at all because it's just not worth it after everything. Thank you.
Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not a fan of putting extra additional costs on businesses, but we don't really have any choice but to implement a policy on this, and I do understand the reasons for it. I see the proposal is to charge the maximum amount. I hear what Councillor Jones has just said, and I do agree that it's hard to make a comparison to a small cafe that might just have a couple of chairs and tables outside to a large coffee shop, because some places and some locations are naturally able to put out a lot more chairs and tables, although you could argue maybe that is reflected in their rents potentially as well. But what I'm not quite sure on is if I understand having a differential, though I'm not quite sure how much that would extra cost that would in the actual the scheme of things to implement having a differential rather than a flat fee. But as if the proposal as it is the maximum amount, and that's to make the regime self-financing, therefore you can't put the fee up more than £500 unless you implement it for 1 year, which I wouldn't support. I think it's right that we should do it for a 2-year period. So the only way to make it less for smaller businesses is if it effectively, as I understand it, would be if the council is subsidising the regime. And we have form on this as a committee and as a council that we've not got taxi licensing is not on a sustainable footing yet. So I am sympathetic to having smaller businesses being able to not have to pay as much, and I welcome that the renewal is only £350, so that's what, £175 a year. But it is difficult when you've got I don't want to start talking about individual trades, but we all know there are premises in the town centre that have a lot of tables and chairs out, and there are some that only have a couple. But I suppose it's a question for officers really. How easy is it to have a scheme that differentiates between because obviously the very nature of not having a flat scheme means that you must have some sort of additional work must be done to work out exactly what those costs are going to have to be. So I'd welcome an officer view on how much extra resource that would place on the council for having a differential scheme rather than a flat rate scheme. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair. The fees and charges, an estimate has been provided to members for consideration, and it does come pretty close to those maximum fees and charges. I would anticipate my officers would have to go out with measuring sticks or counting the numbers of tables and chairs or looking at extra burdens in terms of the non-domestic rateable value applicable to that business. And it would have to look at some kind of sliding scale. It would complicate matters, and it would mean that our officers would have to spend more time reviewing applications and assessing fees and charges on a case-by-case basis. Hugely sympathetic to businesses seeking to avail themselves of this process, and we've tried to facilitate that as much as possible. But as I've said to you, the costs have been offset previously by new burdens funding issued by central government, and it doesn't currently, under the £100 regime, meet the costs of that, and it will mean a lot more work and quite a creative thinking on the part of officers as to how that will be interpreted, and how members would wish that to comprise, if you like. Obviously, it's entirely a matter for you and your colleagues today to determine that, but I have set that out appropriately.
Thank you. Councillor Burgess, please.
Thank you. In other words, not cost effective. I presume. I just want to go back a bit and say, am I incorrect? Just to clarify, I really like this report. I thought it was well written and well presented. Thank you very much. On page 53, am I correct in saying that those with furniture acceptable pre this policy will have to change if it fails to comply with this policy? And if so, will they need to pay the full fee again?
Green, please.
If I may, Chair, if a business is renewing an application, no, they won't have to change anything that they have in place. The furniture that they have been approved previously will stay as is, and everything else will stay as is. If it's a new application, we will work with the businesses about the form and type of furniture that's permitted. It will not impact existing businesses. They will effectively, for want of a better expression, allow to have grandfather rights to move from one when they renew the licence and retain the rights that they have already secured under the Business and Planning Act 2020 and licences issued under that to the 2023 Act. So no, they won't have to make any fundamental different investments or changes, those businesses that are currently operating and seeking to renew. Hopefully that answers the question.
Can I just ask about the fee, please? How did we come... Sorry, how did we heard people talk about the fees. How did we come to the figures that we've got, £500 and then renewing at £350? Is that right? So how did we come to that?
In the appendices that's forming part of the report, it gives you a breakdown of the types of activity and the costs associated with that. So it would comprise of different officers' time, depending on who the officer would be involved. It also factors in costs of legal services, senior officers who are being involved in the process, and regulatory practices and enforcement thereafter. So if you have a look at in the report, in appendix, if I may just have a quick look. It's Appendix B. It gives you an overview of the breakdown of those costs associated and the time that we are currently expending carrying out those particular functions.
So we're talking now, here comes my maths, which isn't usually very good, £500 over 2 years, it's £250 for 1 year. Is that round about less than £25 a month, is that right? So something like that, if they're planning to save for their licence?
In round figures, yes, I'll just do some quick calculations. It's £250 a year. Just to set it in context, it was £520 when one last looked at West Sussex County Council, and you're looking at about £20.83 a month associated with the regime for a new application. Less
Yes,
£350 over 2 years for a renewal is being proposed.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jaggard, please.
Thank you. Thank you for an excellent report and going through it as well. I think probably maybe Councillor Burgess has commented on what I wanted to say. Presumably, the 840 hours that it takes to process a new licence is going to be more or less the same, whatever size the business is. A small business is still going to take 840 odd hours compared to a large business, which is still going to take the same amount of time. Therefore, the cost is going to be the same. And if our aim is to be cost neutral, I can't see how we could be justified in reducing that fee. And as has been said, it used to be pre-COVID £520 for that licence. So in actual fact, it's gone down. It's halved, just over, to £250, and that is then for 2 years. So sorry, £250 per year, which is much less. And again, the renewal, regardless of the size of the premises, the work involved, the 630 hours is still going to take the same amount of time to look at the renewal process. So I really don't see how we can justify reducing the charge, because then we will not actually be covering our costs. And our aim is to be cost neutral. So that was it really. Is it, am I right in saying the cost is the same regardless of the size of the business? Basically, that was the question.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Councillor Jaggard. Yes, essentially yes. It would be the same from the process would be the same irrespective of the size of the business, because we would still need to check compliance, visit, advise, educate, correct any omissions or errors, consult and so on. So the process followed would be the same for whatever size of business was in operation. And as I said, it was £520 for 1 year under the previous regulator, West Sussex County Council.
Thank you. Councillor Wine, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to refer to paragraph 2.1a, which is that if there are to be any future discussions about charges, I think yourself as Chair should be included in those discussions quite clearly. And secondly, assuming that businesses know that these about these proposed revised charges, and I've no idea, no way of knowing if they have been made aware or not, has there been any feedback from them?
Chair, if I may, this report is in the public domain for all parties to see. We have been advising businesses that the matter's come into committee for consideration. It was raised at Pubwatch most recently. But because there's not going to be, other than the cost, any change to the form and content of those businesses who are seeking a renewal, we haven't really received any feedback. They've not been directly consulted, but they've been advised that this regime is coming into being, and members are considering the position and the policy as through the committee procedure. But it's in the public domain.
Thank you. Councillor Nawaz.
Thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Irvine raised a very good point over there. Yes, it's in public domain. Did we actually try to reach out to the businesses or somehow communicated and ask, this report is in public domain? Someone needs to look at it to see if the consultation has been some kind of feedback on that. If it's in there, nobody knows, then it create another, I think, concern. So we take in the decision without public's knowledge anyway.
Okay.
Chair, if I may, the matter was raised at Pubwatch, where a significant number of those businesses who would be affected were present, and no feedback was offered at that environment. and as I say, it's been in the public domain. There's not a statutory requirement to consult. The policy in terms of its form and content has been revised to take account of different operating practices that have been identified over the preceding years and actually seeks to make it easier for businesses to comply. It's a more accessible policy and the conditions that are likely to be applied can be by way of mandatory conditions, and that they're called national conditions set by central government, and other conditions therein. Businesses have been made aware.
Thank you. Councillor Baldwin, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, being a boring accountant as usual. Just looking at page 73, it's not actually 40 hours, is it? It's actually 14 hours because the figures are in minutes above it. So you're saying that 14 hours of staff time cost us £500, which is £35 an hour. Sort of equates to quite a high cost. What else is in that what are you charging that, including in that chargeable £35 an hour?
A range of officers would be involved in the decision-making process. It would include senior officers and their involvement in terms of policy formation, for example, any legal advice that might be sought, implementation on IT. If you look at the bottom of the table, it gives an overview of the costings associated. So it could comprise of technical officers' fees, my service, my time, my boss's time, the head of community services also, and legal time. So it does, the persons involved, the fee does reflect what the hours are and the input from the different officers.
Okay, thank you. But we're talking about overall, we've got 21 licences in Crawley, are we?
Currently, yes, Councillor.
So this is only generating 7,300 and something in terms of fees.
Currently, the fee being generated is relatively low. Yes, £100 for each of those businesses for a renewal period.
At the moment, but you're hoping to raise it obviously to 7,000. It's still quite a low figure in terms of income for the amount of time, presumably, to generate this report alone, I would have said. But so I'm sort of justifying that it should be 350 and 500 for initial, because there must have been a lot of time in generating this report.
Extensive work has been taken in terms of comprising the report, the policy review, regulatory practices and enforcement, education of businesses to secure compliance, review of applications and assessment of those applications, consultation with key partners, receiving consultation from partners and other interested parties. It's a labour-intensive process, shall we say, but we're mindful of the impact on businesses, and that's why the officers have tried to be supportive of businesses and recommended, contrary to other authorities who've applied for an annual licence at different fee levels for a 2-year period, to make the costs more representative, and the breakdown of costs is representative at this time. We may find that we have to do more regulation, more enforcement, more education, but it's rather speculative at this time. But yes, I would respectfully suggest that the fees that have been put before you, which are indeed the maximum, are representative of delivering the service.
Sorry, but certainly in terms of what the monthly cost that we're asking people to pay for these licences is minimal, isn't it, in terms of number of cups of coffee that they've got to sell at £20 a month. It's a reasonable cost to expect people to pay for perhaps doubling the size of their covers, etc. I think it's a reasonable cost.
Right. I personally believe it really depends how much business is benefiting from it. For some business, it's nothing, if they have a good sale, especially pavement sale, it doesn't really matter for them, but there might be few businesses who will find it difficult to, if they are not getting that much benefit out of it, difficult to pay. And then looking at the number of licenses we have, 21 should not be very difficult to manage. I mean, if we base it on rateable value or on the number of, sort of space used or something like that. Yeah?
Chair, if I may, we had lots of feedback from businesses about how important the use of outside areas was to help them survive, particularly during the pandemic, and that has carried over. The number of complaints that we've had in connection with businesses operating on the highway pavement licences, there have been a few. We have had to do some fairly significant enforcement activity and guidance to different businesses to secure compliance. Obviously, I'm at the behest of the committee in terms of the fees that are set. So I have provided you with an overview of the costs that are currently or anticipated to be incurred by the service, and that's why I've put forward a recommendation, or we have put forward a recommendation for the maximum fee levels. Businesses have used the outside areas, they have been used to great effect. If one visits the high street, certainly of an evening, you'll see a full, vibrant environment where the outside areas are effectively doubling or tripling the footfall and the footprint of a business, which has helped to support that business to survive, if you like. And it's asking that a commensurate fee to produce to regulate the regime to help produce those licences is put in place to cover the costs that have been set out to you in the appendices.
Councillor Nawaz.
Thank you. Just want to come back onto the fee side of things. I think I believe I may be wrong or misunderstood. I believe fees non-refundable if you apply for the new. If it's non-refundable fee, £500 from going up from is quite a big investment for a small independent business. And if you don't know you're going to get it or not, because there's a lot of check in there, and the £500 can go. We need to think about it. We're talking about growth here. Only 21 licenses. This is probably already we need to look at it. Why only 21? If that is that good to the businesses, it could have been 100, could have been 50. We're not promoting enough. We're not inviting people in that side. So I think we need to make it attractive for businesses to bring it the openness, the welcoming environment where those 21 can be 40 can be 80. But there's a fear that if a small independent business who is struggling to cope after COVID with a cost of living crisis, and now £500 is non-refundable. That is if it's a businessman looking at it from that side, I don't know I'm going to get it or not. I'm not 100% sure about it. And there's no guarantee for that. I think they will be a little bit unsure about to apply for it. I think we need to make it attractive so more people can apply for it. We need to make this service more open to people so people can come and join this. And then we can have, I understand the renewal fee can be a little bit more, but upfront fee, it sounds a bit high.
Thank you. Green, please.
Just to reassure members, the regime is designed to be permissive and to support businesses. We have not refused any applications thus far. We have worked tirelessly, some businesses more than others, to get the application correct, to support them, to guide them, to ensure compliance. And we have targeted those non-compliant businesses, supporting those businesses that have been part of the regime. Councillor Nawaz is absolutely correct. We need to do more marketing. We need to draw more interest in it. I'm now fully staffed as a department, so I've got the additional resources to be able to do that. And I have already written an enticing spiel, shall we say, to try and encourage people to apply. It's been particularly apparent with the number of inquiries we've been receiving from different types of businesses as we've been having this unseasonably warm weather to avail themselves of that. We've been trying to support businesses to secure licences. Again, the previous regime was 28 days. The new regime is 14 days. If we can determine matters within that timescale and encourage partners to give feedback as appropriate, the licences are secured in a timely and appropriate way with suitable and sufficient conditions to protect local residents, neighbouring businesses and people in that vicinity who want to go to that area. So we are doing a lot of work, and we have spent a lot of time with those 21 businesses, some who have been supported by national chains and have got the application right the first time, some who are not, who have had to work with us we haven't rejected applications, we've simply assisted our customers to get it right, to provide us with the right information and to help them process the matter in a timely way. So we will continue to work supportively with businesses, unless it's on a significant roadway which is prohibited or a significant location. The regime is designed to be permissive and supportive of a pavement licence in accordance with as detailed in the policy. There are some caveats with that, but it's generally been agreed. We have not refused any of the 21 licences. As I said, it's taken a little more time for some businesses to provide us with the information that we require to help them secure that licence, but it's in a supportive capacity and an educative capacity. Licences are not transferable, so if a business is sold, that licence needs to be applied for in good time, and we would look to work with businesses as one business owner is acquired by another. Then we would work with them to make sure that they had the right licences in place to continue the regime. But we are trying our very best to support businesses in this.
Thank you. I think all marketing and also maybe the compliance where some businesses they are using payment but they haven't applied for the license, so maybe there's a compliance issue in some cases as well. Okay. Councillor Jones, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I wanted to just respond to a few things here, because in the discussion, I think we start to lose the wood from the trees, so to speak. I think the point I want to make is the overall policy is fine. It's just the fee that I think is the point of concern here, and it's not necessarily too complicated to come up with something which is fair or fairer. Now, here isn't the place to go into that detail. That's why we agree the rest of the policy, and then we get the officers to look at the fees further. But other authorities have found a way. Clearly, there's a way forward. And dismissing that and saying, oh, well, let's just go with this because, it complicates covering the cost seems the wrong way to look at it, with respect. And I think, hopefully as well, officers should confirm that there is scope, because this fee is over 2 years, there is scope to be more flexible in this in terms of perhaps charging smaller businesses less and those who make more money out of having the pavement licences more. But all I would say is if you price businesses out, we won't get more money out of this process, we'll just issue fewer licences. So hopefully that addresses some of the points that have been raised in the meeting today.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. My concern is about that we said that it doesn't matter what the size of the business is going to be, it'll be the same amount. And that's what my concern is, that if it's a very small business and they charge the same amount as somebody that's got a huge successful business. So that's the first point. Can we not look at individual cases and think, okay, they're starting new, or they're not making much money, so we can look at their fees, because a new fee of 500, I think that's a lot of money, and also a renewal, and if they're not making much money, I think that is a lot. And what Corinne just mentioned, something about like, that's another concern I've got. So if somebody puts an application in and then they're not allowed to have the license, will we refund the money? Or that's not the case? I mean, so that the premises or outside area was not feasible. We said, no, that's not safe. We don't want you to have a license for the outside area. Do we not stop the application there and then? If that makes sense, what I mean.
Councillor Khan, thank you. In the majority of instances, people will talk to us first before submitting an application, and the policy is quite clear about what we will and generally won't permit. And we've had a number of speculative inquiries about a pavement licence, one in very close proximity to a major junction, and there were some public safety concerns. And so we can't stop people applying if they wish to apply for a licence, but we can certainly offer them some guidance about the appropriateness of an application. Often that is without payment of a fee, just an initial fact-finding mission, if you like, for a business. But once an application is submitted, that fee is a requirement and has been when under the current regime, which is £100. We anticipate that the level of demand will increase as businesses are more educated, made more aware of the licensing regime under pavement licensing, and we anticipate that that workload will increase commensurate with the role. It would be a tax deductible fee as well as our other business fees associated with an operation, and that's in part why other authorities have decided to charge £500 for a year and £350 for a year, but recognising the impact on businesses, that's why officers have recommended a 2-year maximum duration. There may be some absolute exceptions where a licence can only be issued for a shorter period, but there would be absolutely the exception. And as I've said, and probably laboured the point a little, we have not refused any applications. We've offered advice and guidance where perhaps someone has sought to install 60 covers in a very small space area. We've advised that actually that's not safe nor suitable, and they've revised their application as part of the process.
Thank you. Councillor Hilton, please.
Can I just, I won't discuss the fees element at the outset. Can I just ask a question, first of all, just on 8.9, on the other, on the disability, sorry, I've got a bit of frog in my throat. Obviously, it's good we've got a new power in terms of furniture and removing it if it's unsafe and stuff. I'm just not sure in terms of the consultation, because there's been no complaints, is a great judge of whether it's a good policy or not, and whether we need to do some more work on what particular groups, particularly obviously disabled people with mobility and sighting problems. I just wondered if there's been a good opportunity to look at what these groups are actually thinking, because they haven't complained doesn't mean it's an issue. I mean, as we know ourselves, the rules on removable properties is quite confusing to the business and quite confusing to the general public. So in terms of, I know it's mentioned in the Equality Impact Statement in the Appendix D, but I just wondered if we could be a little less glib on that and just see if there's an actual issue, you know, when you're talking to potential people, and perhaps do some kind of audit as in terms of new regime of a sample of some of the pavement policies, pavement licences already issued, and just to see whether for those groups, not only covered by the Colleges Act, but people with buggies and stuff are affected by furniture on the road, because it's a good legal power we've got, and I think we should use it. In terms of the more substantive issue concerning the fees, obviously you're dealing with a lot of applications at the moment. It's not entirely clear whether they actually know about the new burdens that should be placed upon them. I mean, I'm not a small businessman myself, but through my professional work, I've met a lot of small businesses, and you know, there are particularly upfront costs, and you know, Councillor Belbin's right. It's not a massive amount of money within the budget. I know we're stretched, but if we can find ways to be friends of small businesses and reduce that burden, I mean, I think if you had £500, that's £250, 250 cups of tea for a start, which you've got to put up front on the non-refundable deposits. And it's not just differentiating between big and small businesses, it's differentiating between different parades. I can think of two of my favourite cafes on parades in the town. One's got a very small seating and one's got a very large one. And, you know, it's still the same price. And yes, it's probably still the same cost, but it's still the same price for the licensing. And I don't want to go through the figures tonight. It's a lot of work, and I'm a bit confused about the level of consultation has been with the trade. And yes, it's gone to pub watch, but you know, as we know tonight, not everyone speaks up at meetings, especially if there's a big meeting with different traders. I just wondered if we could have a slightly more formalised consultation go back to the officers and decide something between the officers and the chair of the committee. I don't want to decide anything now, the nitty gritty, but if we could reduce the burden of small businesses, so be it.
Chair, if I may assist, the national mandatory conditions, which were defined by the Secretary of State, set out some of the requirements that have been suggested, particularly in the Appendix 4. It's a condition that clear routes of access along the highway must be maintained, taking into account the needs of disabled people and the recommended minimum footway widths and distances required by access by mobility impaired and visually impaired people, as set out in section 3.1 of the Inclusive Mobility. Guidance on the effectiveness of this condition, to the extent that conditions are imposed or deemed to be imposed on a pavement licence, do not require the licence holder to require clear routes of access to be maintained, taking into account the needs of disabled people and the recommended minimum footway and distances as per the mobility. And the licence is granted subject to that. There are some requirements within the policy itself in conjunction with central government who looked at inclusive mobility. This is a continuance of the regime, and it's required that businesses maintain clear routes of access consistent with the requirements set out in the condition, and there's a 2-metre requirement in terms of space to allow people that may be using different mobility aids or similar to access safely and suitably the locality. So that's already enshrined and covered in the national conditions that are forming part of the policy itself. In terms of the new burdens funding that has been alluded to, that was as part of the commencement of the regime and provided to local authorities to help with the implementation of the pavement licensing regime dating back to 2020. This fee that's being suggested today has arisen following feedback and consultation with local authorities that the original £100 fee for a 1-year licence did not adequately cover the cost of the regime, and that is why the government has put forward a recommendation of a maximum of £350 and £500 for a renewal and new licence respectively, and left it at the discretion of authorities as to the duration of those licences, be it 1 year / 2 years. I hope that's covered the questions. Forgive me, or do advise if I've missed any point there.
It's just a question about the disability thing and the comment in the paper about we haven't had any complaints. I'm just not sure that's a good way of gauging whether there's an issue there or not.
Forgive me, Councillor, I'm not sure I said we would respond to complaints. We have had some feedback from different people about different things associated with pavement licensing, but in the policy itself it does specify the 2-metre distance that's sought, which accords with the inclusive mobility guidance and accords with the mandatory condition that government's recognising quite rightly what you say in terms of the needs of access and egress for people with disabilities. That national condition kind of covers the authority and other authorities implementing the regime. And if we were to get complaints, which we haven't since the commencement of the regime, it doesn't mean that we won't. We would, as we would with any complaint, we would investigate that and visit the site and make an appropriate assessment. There are provisions within the legislation to allow the authorities to amend or indeed revoke licences where issues do present. As I said, it is designed to be a permissive regime with certain controls in place, enshrined in the national conditions and the localised conditions that form part of the policy. So there should be some protections afforded to particular vulnerable groups of the society.
Councillor Ayling, please.
Yeah, I was just wondered if for small businesses that don't make so much money, maybe there could be some kind of a monthly payments rather than the £500 in one lump, or if they pay the £500 in one lump, maybe for the following year they could perhaps have a saving scheme where they pay so much per month so that the following year it's already paid. I don't know if that's an option or not. Thank you.
Please, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Experience has shown that where people are paying a monthly amount or similar, we will often see that direct debit mechanism cancelled, which results in further work for officers to go and try and recover monies, shall we say. We do consider, by exception, applications for payment of different fees over a different period of time, but that's absolutely by exception rather than the rule. It would cause a greater administrative burden on the service and would result in further costs being incurred if that direct debit arrangement or whatever financial arrangement was not kept to and would require additional work.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, that's why I said the other option was to pay it in advance. So if they did pay, say, the £500 for the first year, then the following time, or the first 2 years, the following renewal price could be done on a monthly basis, so it's paid in advance, so that at the end of the 2 years, that new amount has already been paid. Then if they cancel the direct debit, they then have to pay it in full at the end of the 2 years. You know, it's up to them if they keep that direct debit up.
Chair, if I may, it's quite a significant administrative burden to kind of have to chase businesses for payment. We still have to do that under the Licensing Act 2003, where we actually have legislative provisions to suspend a licence. This regime doesn't currently allow for that to take place if a payment is not made. Essentially, over a 2-year period, you're looking at £250 a year for a new business for 2 years, and 175, I think we said, for renewal. I would be cautious, shall we say, in terms of looking to allow for a direct debit payment or other financial arrangement other than payment on application, because we are already in other parts of the service chasing non-payers, if you like, across the Licensing Act and in the taxi regime, where there are different processes at play.
Thank you. Councillor Jackal, please.
Thank you. I think I've forgotten what I was going to say. This all started earlier on when Councillor Jones sort of referred to the smaller businesses, and I think he referred to Brighton and Hove, but I can't remember precisely. But looking at the details here, Brighton and Hove actually charge more for that service because their charges are only over 1 year, so it's £500 just for 1 year. And it looks like the small businesses get charged £150 for renewal over 1 year and £350 for the larger businesses per year. So they're actually being charged more for that different level of service. And basically it all comes down to being cost neutral, because if the applicant is not covering the cost of their licence, and you know, £175 over a year is not, for a business, a huge cost. They have other costs, they have other business outgoings, and if they are not covering the cost of their licence, the service is not going to be cost neutral, and that means that residents, presumably, are going to be taking up that shortfall. The council is going to be taking up that shortfall of the cost. And we've had this before. We're a council that is not in a great financial position, yet we are now suggesting that maybe we can subsidise businesses in their licence application. And I do find that really quite worrying, that we're just going down a rabbit hole, that at the moment we're reluctant to charge businesses the full cost of administrating those licences, but going forward, that small cost is going to become a greater and greater deficit, like it has in the taxi licensing regime, where we end up having a large deficit, and residents are filling that gap. And going forward, residents will be filling this gap, and I do find that really quite worrying. And therefore, I really think we need to have the charges as recommended, because they cover the actual hours that officers take to get that licence, to provide that licence for those businesses over a 2-year period. So businesses can plan, they can plan ahead for the renewal, £175 over a year, going up to continuing on a 2-year basis, so it's 350 over the 2-year basis, they can plan ahead. They don't have to panic every year. 2 years is a great time to get all their money together, to get their business planning together, to make that charge. Otherwise, residents are just going to have to fill in the gap, which I don't think is fair on the other residents of the borough. Thank you.
I personally think no one is suggesting that council go into deficit. It's just how we sort of price it. Maybe, you know, have a fixed fee for all the businesses, or we find another way where it's based on a benefit for larger businesses. You charge more, and for smaller businesses, or you know, you have a different sort of fee structure. So that's what I think, you know, should happen. Anyway, do you want?
Chair, if I may assist, the legislation specifies that an application must be accompanied by such a fee not exceeding the relevant amount that the local authority may require. So the maximum fee, as I've said and laboured somewhat, is £500 and £350, but the application has to be accompanied with the full fee rather than what is being suggested in terms of financial arrangements being made. Otherwise, the application in of itself would not be considered to be relevant.
Councillor Noyes, please.
Yeah, so 21 pavement licences, and I think you can imagine most of those businesses, some big, some small. Thinking about the small ones, because they're not very large inside, so what's offered on the outside, not a great deal either, but it actually adds maybe 50% or more to what they've got, so it gives them an opportunity. Of the large ones, places like Wildwood, Prezzo, Octopus, etc., it's a significant amount of space. And in the case of something like Octopus, it's sort of a large part of their business in the evening. I think a lot fewer people go to their pub because there's not so much space inside. So it really does actually sort of benefit them significantly. What I'd actually like to see, if you're going to have a review, the idea of reviewing the cost to the bigger businesses, so perhaps they pay a bit more and the smaller businesses pay a bit less, and it evens itself out. And also for the larger businesses, because there are a lot more people outside on these pavement licences and so on and so forth, there are likely to be more sort of issues or incidents or things to be taken into consideration, which will take up more of the officer's time, etc., etc. So I think that would actually help to smooth that out. Thank you.
Councillor Jones, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think we're in danger of going around in circles a bit now, in the sense that, I mean, I'm going to propose my proposal, and it can either stand or fall. I don't mind. I shall read it out fairly slowly so Democratic Services can write it down. But I mean, for a start, it's not an isolated example because it's of the three parts of the recommendation, it's the first thing that's mentioned. You know, and it's also some of the opposition members' contributions appear to be just obfuscating the issue because they just don't want to say as much that they want to charge the full amount. And I think what I would like to propose then is this, and I hope I'll have a seconder, is that of the recommendation as it's currently drafted, is that item part A is deleted, and that part B remains as it is, which accepts the principle of the period of 2 years. Part C remains as it's worded, amending the pavement licence policy as the rest of it is listed. I would add the following wording, Chair, as the committee's guide, or the committee is after Appendix A, subject to delegating the final decision on fees outlined in the policy to the portfolio holder in conjunction with the head of community services and chair of the licensing committee to decide the final figures, subject to the considerations raised at this committee, such as size of business and benefit derived from the licence. read it again. Okay. I'll read it more slowly this time as well. So for Part C, amends the pavement licence policy as issued in Appendix A, comma, subject to delegating the final decision on fees outlined in the policy to the portfolio holder in conjunction with the head of community services and chair of the licensing committee to decide the final figures, comma, subject to the considerations raised at this committee, such as the size of business and benefited derived from the licence issued.
Chair, if I may seek clarification, I understand the suggestion that's been made in terms of the size of the business, but the authority would not be privy to information relating to the benefit derived by the business in terms of its operation. We wouldn't be available with that sensitive, commercially sensitive information would not be available to the authority to consider. And so I'm not sure how I would, would calculate that.
Okay,
most respectfully, Councillor James.
Okay, thank you, Corinne. I suppose the point just being made here is that a larger space on the pavement is going to be potentially more of benefit to a business than a very small section. I mean, clearly we're giving a steer to the officers to come back with an equitable arrangement rather than I don't think anything there is giving such a rigid instruction that you can't work something out from that. And obviously if any member of the committee disagrees with me, they can vote against the proposal.
I think no one is going to share their financial information with us. It will be based on the space used by the business.
Thank you, Chair. That's most helpful.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a comment on the current proposal. The function of miscellaneous licensing, including pavement licensing, is covered by the Local Authorities Functions and Responsibilities England Regulations 2000. It's in Schedule 1, which means it is not to be a function of the executive of the council. For that reason, I don't think that the decision relating to fees can be delegated to a member of the executive. It could be delegated by this committee to an officer, but I don't believe it can be delegated to a portfolio holder in those circumstances.
Thank you for clarifying that, Astrid. That wasn't what it was indicated to me when I tried to discuss this before the meeting. So in that case, I wouldn't see any other choice than to propose that we defer well, at least the fees section of the report to a future meeting of the licensing committee, if we can't. Or what you're saying is we defer it to, or we delegate it to the head of service. I don't really see the difference between delegating it to the cabinet member in consultation with the chair of licensing and the head of service to delegating it to the head of service in conjunction with the head of service. Sorry, with the portfolio holder and the chair of licensing.
It'll be delegated to the officer, but with the consultation of portfolio holder and the chair of the committee. That's what's suggested.
Okay, but then the original recommendation was to delegate it in conjunction with the portfolio holder and the chair of licensing committee. So I don't see how what I've proposed infringes it. But okay, if would it be acceptable then if the wording was changed in conjunction delegating the final decision on fees outlined in the policy to the head of community services in conjunction with the portfolio holder and chair of the licensing committee, because Because otherwise the original recommendations...
Surely, given the legal advice that we have just had from the legal officer, we might as well just use the recommendations that are here, because it does say, as you've just mentioned, Councillor Jones, that adopts the suggested fee structure as included in Appendix B, with any subsequent revisions to fees to be delegated to Head of Community Services in conjunction with the portfolio holder and Chair of Licensing Committee, which is what you've just sort of said.
No, I don't think... I didn't say that.
I've just read it.
Well, you've read what the recommendation says, and that's subsequent fees.
Sorry, Councillor Jones, I do apologise. I have reviewed this report, and that I did overlook that. It probably should say in consultation with rather than in conjunction with in the existing recommendation, which is actually how it usually is worded.
Okay.
So I do
apologise.
Then, okay,
my proposal then, that's without making this ridiculously complicated, is what I said, but to delegate its Head of Community Services in consultation with the portfolio and the Chair of the Licensing Committee. Either that, or I'm going to have to propose that the fees get referred to a future committee.
And with the analysis brought forward.
Yeah, and with the analysis brought forward.
And Councillor Jones, the only other change would be that in the current recommendation C, to adopt the policy as in the appendix, would be except for paragraph 3.2, which sets out the fees.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
okay,
so just make that specification.
So that would be, yes, outline the policy, except, yeah. Well, anyway, subject to that, Chair, I move. Is he gone? Oh.
Okay. So the amendment that has been proposed is to amend recommendation 2.1C from to the following. That the committee amends the pavement licence policy as included at Appendix A, except section 3.2, paragraph 3.2, I believe. Subject to delegating the final decision on fees outlined in the policy to the Head of Community Services in consultation with the portfolio holder and the Chair of the Licensing Committee to decide the final figures, subject to the considerations raised at this committee, such as the size of the business and benefit derived from the licence to be issued. Okay. I was just about to ask for a mover and a seconder. Okay. The amendment's been proposed.
Do we have a seconder for this? Councillor Noyes. So the committee needs to take the vote on the amendment first. So all those in favour? All those against? All those abstaining? None. None. Okay. So
So that's also
that's become a substantive recommendation, but also that there needs to be a vote on the full recommendations, but we're excluding recommendation A.
Yes.
Is that right?
What does B say? My computer's just run out. I'm so sorry.
B is the
2 years. That's not controversial. So no A, B, and then C with the quite long amendments.
Do you want me to explain that?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So, just to be clear,
Excuse
the
me.
committee has voted in favour of the amendment. So now the committee needs to move to a vote on the recommendations in the report. So recommendation 2.1C is, as amended, now becomes a substantive recommendation, but the committee also needs to lose, as part of the implication of approving C, we need to lose recommendation A, which is to adopt the suggested fee structure at Appendix B. So the committee will be voting on recommendation 2.1B, which is that it agrees that where it is appropriate to grant a pavement licence, that is ordinarily granted for a period of 2 years, and 2.1C, as I've just read out. Okay.
All those in favour? All those against?
3.
No abstentions?
Sorry, 4.
No abstentions.
And that's it then.
Right. Okay. So there's no supplemental agenda, so the business of the committee is concluded. I declare the meeting closed at 20:33. Thank you.